Right. Well, thank you so much for joining on this afternoon's or this morning's webinar, depending on where you are. My name is Romy Beard. I'm the head of publisher relations at Chronosob. And today we'll talk about finding the perfect fit, factors in journal selection and redirection, because a lot of times authors struggle with finding the right place straight away the first time for their manuscript. So talk with our three panelists about, how do authors struggle, how they can find the best journals and what those challenges are. So I've got three speakers with me today. I've got Chirag J. Patel from Cactus Communications, Michael Addish from University of California, Davis with the kind of library perspective to it, and then Andrea Tironi from Springer Nature for the publisher perspective. So before I hand over to Jay to get us started, just a couple of housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded, so you don't need to take a ton of notes. You can go back and watch again. And if you're watching it later, thanks for watching. And we'll make the slides available as well. There's a Q&A and a chat. If you have any questions, if you could post them in the Q&A in the second half of the webinar, we'll bring them into the discussion. I've got a few preset questions. And in terms of agenda, obviously I'm doing the quick introduction now, and then I'll hand over to my three speakers for some really short presentations on their perspectives, and then we dive into the discussion, and it's really quite interactive, so please feel free to post your questions or put things in the chat if you have any comments for our speakers, but anyone attending is just watching and not participating with video or audio. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jay. Just let me know when you want to go to the next slide, and I'll move that along for you. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you very much for everyone who's attending. Also, thanks to Romy for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to listening and learning from Michael and Andrea. Quite excited about that as well. So I'm Jay Patel. I'm with Cactus Communications, and I'm the head of sales for the Americas. All that means is that I'm responsible for all of our various different product lines, which include author services, journal selectors, all sorts of AI solutions, as well as research communications. So can we go to the next one? So I really want to talk a little bit about a survey that we had run. Now it's been quite a few years now, but I think it's still quite relevant. We ran this back in 2018, where we had asked authors from all across the world to give us their perspectives on what challenges they were facing, what they wished would be different about the submission publication process. We received around 7,000 responses. And majority of those were actually from China, which is, of course, a very important and a leading market for publishers of realistically all types. At the moment, even back in 2018, it was one of the leading producers of research, and today I believe it's the leading producer of research. And we had really a mix of audiences in the sense that most of the respondents were early career researchers. Many of them had just either published very few articles, or they had published none at all, or were still in the process of publishing their first one. Majority of them either spoke English or Chinese. We did have some representation of Portuguese and Japanese, as well as Korean. So this is truly a very global survey. The vast majority of folks were not English proficient or English as a first language. And so, as we know, that adds a whole other level of complexity and challenges for the author when they're not English proficient, or English is not their first language. Writing can be, very challenging. So they do need extra support and assistance, through that process. If we can go to the next one. Yeah. So in particular to journal selection, what we found is that, a fair amount of our respondents found the whole business of selecting a journal quite challenging. And that could be due to, of course, the fact that majority of our respondents, were not native English speakers. So sometimes that language barrier has an impact. The other thing could be that they might not know exactly what they're looking for, in the sense that they might say, "Hey, I'm looking for a high impact factor journal," which everyone's looking for, I think, which every author is looking for. Um, but they may think, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to submit it to here because this has a high impact factor," without really checking the submission guidelines or the scope, or even, what that journal has published in the past that might align with what they're looking to publish. Um, I think it's really important that we really think about what the authors are struggling with, in the sense that, is it better to maybe try to communicate this as, offer it more than English? So is there a way that we can do a multilingual approach to these guidelines, or to these scopes? How can we best communicate and make it easy for people to find the information they're looking for, so they can connect it to what they're looking to publish? Um, and when we did ask, hey, what do you look for when when you are looking for a journal? Um, Basically, they said high impact factor was number one, which is not a surprise. That the journal had published papers in the topic that they published in, and of course, short publication times. Those are the top three um, wants from the author. And neither of those probably surprises anyone on this call, because those are usually what authors are looking for anyway. But the challenge here is, again, just because they have high impact factor doesn't mean that your paper is going to be accepted, because it might be completely out of scope. So you have to be very careful with that. Also, short publication times. Uh, you, again, I think many of the rejections come down to because it's not just a good match for the journal. Along with issues of language, but typically, if you're submitting to a journal and it's out of scope, you're not going to get much of anywhere. So it's really important to kind of match your manuscript to exactly what you're looking for, or what exactly the journal is looking for. Here we go to the next one. All right. Yeah. So one of the ways that uh, you know that publishers and vendors have tried to make it easier for authors to locate journals is by developing these journal finders, and there's many, many, many of these out there, and they all work to varying different degrees. Some of them are, some of them use, large language models or machine learning. Others are very rudimentary, in the sense that they're just using keywords and topics in order to match either abstracts or categories or subject areas to specific journals. Here are just a few samplings of journal finders. So we have Researcher.life, which, full transparency, that's a product that we at Cactus developed, and it's available for free to researchers. But what it does is, on the back end, we fingerprint journals, and we collect information from the journal websites to try to get an idea of, what the journals are publishing, speed of publication, if it's an open access journal, what the APC is. So we provide as much information up front to that researcher as possible, so they can make the right decision. And they can use everything from an abstract, to doing a subject search, to doing a title search, in order to find, um, the relevant journals, and then filter down from that. Um, LetPub is another really popular one, and they also use, very much a category subject sort of search list. I think a lot of people have heard of Jane, which has been around for a very long time, and that uses an abstract based search, that you copy paste your abstract into it. And of course, all the major publishers have one available on their website as well, for their own specific journals that they publish. The thing with the top three here is that they kind of look across all publishers, whereas the ones on the bottom are specific to the publisher owned public journals only. Um, and whenever we talk about journal selection, the other important thing is how to avoid predatory publishers. And it's really not as easy as just looking at a journal and saying, that's predatory. I can tell because of the title or where they're based. Because there's a whole bunch of complexity behind it, because these predatory publishers are quite innovative. and how they commit fraud. So sometimes they will just uh, they will wholesale copy a journal's website, design, everything, logo, and set up shop on a completely illegitimate website, and that can very easily fool an author, especially someone who might be an early career researcher who may not have had this experience of actually locating the right journal. Um, so I think it's really important that authors be educated on the think, check, submit system, where it's really just about doing doing very basic rudimentary things like, hey, does this journal look right to me? Does it smell right to me? I mean, are they asking for payment? So really famous thing. Some of them will ask for payment for you to withdraw a paper you submitted. That's a big red flag. Low APCs and quick publication times is another, could be another red flag. Um, Also, does a journal like publish everything? Like, if they say, hey, we're, in diabetes, but are they only publishing diabetes, or are they publishing everything else under the sun? So, those are some of the red flags, and I think it's really important that authors be educated about this, um, just to make sure that they can avoid the predators. That's it. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Jay. Some really interesting things you've touched on that we'll come back to in the discussion, notably about how the journal recommenders work. And I've got some questions for you on that. But I'll hand over to Michael just now. He'll talk about the library's perspective and supporting researchers finding the best journals for them. Thanks, Michael.
Yes, hello and good morning here from Sacramento, California. Sun's coming up right now, so it's pretty early. I'm glad to be here. When Romy asked me the first time, would you like to join the panel? I was thinking, and I saw the topic and said, what I'm gonna talk about, because we take a hands-off approach. If you go to the next slide, Romy, please. We take a hands-off approach because the author has academic freedom. They can publish whatever they want, whatever they want. And as a library, we don't really interfere there. We let them make their own decision at the end. However, next slide, please. I realized we do provide some guidance here, and especially in my role as the scholarly communication officer at Davis, where I help people to find their way around our open access agreement and open access publishing and so on. I'm getting approached by researchers, and especially by early career researchers, who ask, well, where can I publish? What's the first step if I have a good manuscript and I want to publish? What am I doing now? So I have a few tips that I recommend. Look at Web of Science, Scopus, Dimensions, whatever you can get your hands on, and check where authors in your field have published. See what the journals are that publish most of the research that you are involved in. And these are already sort of good choices, probably. Also, of course, if you have a manuscript, you have a reference list, and look where these folks that you cite, where they have published. And then very often, if you look at the scholarly paper and look at the reference list, there are a couple of journals who pop up all the time, because these are the main journals for this particular field or this particular research topic. Then, of course, you have peers and PIs and senior researchers in your department and in your research group that you can ask. I mean, this is usually, there are exceptions, but usually it's a very collegial atmosphere in research groups. Senior researchers are very happy to help. And guide young researchers and tell them, oh, this is a good journal, and tell them about their experiences, and say, well, that's a good journal, has a high impact factor, but man, this is really hard to work with the editor there, so avoid that. So these are things that I direct people to. And then, of course, and Jay mentioned them all. Thank you for this very comprehensive list. I will have a look myself later. the journal picker tool that publishers and other services are coming up with. The downside or the restrictions on especially the publisher tools might be, and what we'll learn probably more from Andrea in a minute, is that I think they try to keep authors in their own universe, so which is not necessarily a bad, or well, that's what it is, so I accept this. I understand that. But you might not necessarily get recommendation for journals that are published by other publishers. So get them the next slide, please. So then selecting the journals, that's another, that's the next step. So you have a list of journals that would be appropriate for your topic. Then, of course, you think about the intended audience, and this is sort of goes into the first slide as well. So who are you writing for? Who do you want to read your research and build upon it and so on? So that's the first thing. Then, of course, the impact factor, Jay mentioned this as well. In terms of predatory journals, it's very interesting that they all have impact factors. They all have on their main website an impact factor so and so. But then when you look a little bit closer, it's never the journal impact factor based on the journal citation reports from Clarivate. It's some number very often that who knows where it is coming from ResearchGate or from Google Scholar or wherever. So this is something that I educate people about, so tell them the difference. Do you want to publish open access? So that's in our campus and our university system. It's very important. As you probably know, we are very we're encouraging people to publish open access. We're very pro open access. We have open access agreements with a number of publishers where our authors can publish for reduced or for reduced APC or for free if they don't have research funding. And I'm not steering people to this directly to the agreements or to the publishers we have an agreement with, but I tell them if you want to publish open access, then and you should, and we encourage you, then you have to think about how you pay for it. And if maybe you have research funding, that's great, you publish wherever you want. But if you don't have research funding, you might consider publish somewhere where the institution is supporting you financially in order to make this happen. And then there are also things like the rejection rate, for example. Again, Jay mentioned this already. So I encourage people to be confident about your research. It's probably very good research, but be also realistic. So don't waste everybody's time by sending everything to Nature in the first place and then go slowly down. And turnaround times is a similar thing. So many for some publishers it takes a while. It also depends a little bit on journals, depends on peer reviewers and so on. But some journals have a really short turnaround time. So if you are interested, if it's important to you that the article is published relatively quickly, look at this as well. And next slide. And this is the last one, of course, avoid predatory publishers. And here again, Jay mentioned already the Think, Check, Submit. That's a very good website that I also recommend. I was a little bit surprised when Jay showed this graph that about 20% of the authors that the service contacted found it extremely difficult to find the right journal. That this something showed me we have to do quite a bit of work in educating people, but also educating them about predatory publishers. And that's probably something that we can talk about a little bit more. I have a couple of horror stories that I got from our campus, but also from colleagues from other campuses that I like to tell people that this could happen. and to make them aware this is really a big problem. But because it's difficult to find a journal, because people often feel lost in this decision making and the search, it's relatively easy then for predatory journals to send out emails and approach authors or researchers to get to lure them basically into their place, and yeah, that's dangerous and not good for anybody except for the journal. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. And over to you, Andrea. You look like you're raring to go. You have a lot to say.
Well, I'll try and be pretty brief just to introduce myself. So yeah, my name is Andrea Taroni. I'm Director of Submissions and Author Service at Springer Nature. By way of introduction, my background is as a researcher in condensed matter physics. I then moved into editorial work. I was chief editor of Nature Physics for many years. And latterly, I've become very interested in content retention So I basically am business owner for transfers at Springer Nature across all of our portfolios, and that is a very important part of our content retention strategy. We have 3 portfolios that are, we have something like 3,000 journals. So logistically, it's very hard. Like, a challenge for us is to surface the right journal to the right set of authors so that they get the best author experience and the best outcome, which is to have their paper published as promptly as possible. We have like the Nature portfolio, which is like the world I come from originally. And as Michael says, you know, lots of people like to aim for the sky, for the moon, as it were, and then they kind of have to pare back their expectations. And it's not a very pleasant experience to be kind of like rejected, and then until you find your home. So we're very keen to kind of try and guide people to the right journal home as swiftly as possible. But there is this very interesting tension between, should we say, people's dreams and then the reality that they then contend with as their work makes contact with, like, you know, the wider community that they're trying to engage with. In addition to the Nature portfolio, we also have sort of BMC brand, which is a bit of a pioneer in open access, and finally Springer, which, you know, you may remember nearly a decade ago now, like we were 2 separate companies, Springer and Nature, and we merged. So yeah, as I say, I think our challenge is actually surfacing the information that we think would be useful to authors. So what may superficially appear to be a simple thing, like we know that libraries tend to support open access publishing, as Michael said. Well, we know that funders do. Not all of our journals are, however, open access, and not all of our authors are subject. There's a multitude of transformative agreements of, like, you know, people have their own funding, they can pay the APC that way. Other people have some sort of a regional based sort of particular pricing point that's different from another, you know, region. How do we get this information to authors is logistically really quite challenging. So actually, I did notice Jay did not point out that our journal suggester, and the reason is because there isn't one to point to. So because we had one and we're in the process of rebuilding one, and our hope is that it will be a much more user-friendly one, which actually also in some sense, so we needed to do 3 things: give authors useful information, things like turnaround times, funding eligibility. You know, we like to think we're not a predatory publisher, but giving people kind of that reassurance that this is a credible venue for them. Secondly, we also actually want to think a little bit about warming authors up to the possibility that they may not get published in their preferred venue, and that they may have to therefore transfer to another journal and find sort of a more suitable home there. And it's not the end of the world. Sometimes journals just have, you know, there's a question of scope, there's a question of the claims maybe are not quite what you think they can be, but slightly reframed. They would be interesting to perhaps a broader journal. And I think, to me, the fascinating thing is just the fact that authors are ultimately the same people. They're scientists, and they also act as reviewers, they also act as editors, and they also act as readers. And when they wear these different hats, even the same individual can give us very different feedback. The final thing I'll mention is I actually was involved. The reason I got into my current role was through a small pilot that we did at Nature a couple of years ago called Guided Open Access. And the idea here was, you may recall, Nature itself announced that it would start allowing authors to publish open access through like some comparatively very high APC. And a way to mitigate this when we made our announcement was, well, we're going to try this pilot where if you submit to us, you can pay a flat fee to have your paper, considered, only if it goes out for review, to be clear. If it's reviewed, we will, charge a flat editorial assessment fee. And then if you make it through to publication at one of either, Nature Communications, or the Communication Series journals, you pay a top-up fee, which reflects the convening power of that journal. And the total sum of these two, evaluation and top-up fees, would be less than the headline APC of direct open access. There are a few things we learned from that. One is that this pricing structure was too complex to articulate in a single paragraph, and that put authors off. But the main thing is that authors actually tended to appreciate this kind of separation of evaluation and then convening power. Like, we did have some interesting sort of like data suggesting people found this useful. However, there was always this tension between authors' expectation and then authors' kind of the feedback they got from reviewers. And managing this is very much what an editor, has to do. And so, yeah, it's a complicated kind of, there is no silver bullet, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And the final thing I'll mention is just to, maybe I've said it already, I've forgotten, but I wanted to confirm that Michael's point is that, yes, when you submit to any publisher, we are thinking quite a lot about how to retain that content in-house. Like, of course, we feel we have lots of options that serve lots of authors in whatever guise they come. So like, we're adding value, we're giving you a way to get a platform. But of course, we would like to publish you, and we would like you ideally to sort of like remain in-house. So yeah, that's my piece.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Yeah, a lot of overlap and different angles of the same thing. So I think we'll start off by talking about journal recommenders, journal finders, journal guides. Chronosoft actually has a journal guide as well, but we don't have the recommender piece, so it's limited based on open access agreements and funding eligibility and some of the clean metadata like subject categories. And it's interesting when we looked at that list, Jay, that you had of like what's important to authors. Some of it is pure metrics like speed metrics, that really easy to include in an piece of information like that, or then matching an abstract to what's already been published. I think the one that and that goes along with the scope of the journal. I think the one that I find quite interesting, and I think that's probably hardest, and I'd be curious to hear if any of the existing ones do this, is what do my colleagues and seniors read? Obviously, Michael, you advise them to go look at Web of Science, go and look where they publish, but the element of, well, what are they actually reading? I wonder if anyone's been using, AI to look at, well, who are you? Who are your peers, others that are in the same department, and get reading information? Or is this one that's still too hard to pinpoint?
I haven't mentioned AI actually to authors because I think it might be a little bit too early, but maybe not. Maybe I'm a little bit too far behind here in this section. Of course, you could use AI tools in order to find something that is up to the researcher, him or herself. Yeah, so that's a short answer. I think AI has potential there, a big potential to find the best fit, because you could bring in all the different aspects that you're looking for? I mean, from audience to who's publishing there, to impact factor, to rejection rates and whatnot. This could be all mixed into one tool that then basically comes up with a list, maybe a ranked list even, on which journals that you might want to submit to.
Is that something you're looking to include, Andrea? Do you know, like, so
Yeah,
that
I
all
was about to say,
what our peers read or where your peers publish?
so we are definitely, investing quite a lot in AI, and we're looking at ways of leveraging AI for the problem of logistically matching authors with a good venue to publish. The question of what your peers are reading. So actually, we're straying into the area now of, like, I suppose, like, platforms, right? And so, like, as we are actually in the process of trying to consolidate our platform, so that when you come to Springer Nature, it is very clear to you that, like, okay, this is a paper that's like on the published in Nature, and other people are reading, similar things in this other portfolio, and we can somehow tell you, like, there's some sort of a portal basically where you as a researcher, you can have your reviewer history, your editor history, your author history, and it's all somehow connected in a way that's like, yeah, also what we suggest to you to read is like informed by what your peers are doing. I think the challenge for us is basically we currently exist in a bit of a patchwork of different systems from which we're trying to pull information together, and actually it really is, sometimes we can surface as much information as we like about what your peers are reading, and therefore you might want to consider this journal to submit to because it looks like that's an area where your community is convening. In the end, people just want to submit where they want to submit, right? So there's kind of these sort of, well, my community is always published in this journal, and and nothing will ever change that. Suddenly you get these herd dynamics that somehow seem to dominate behavior in a way that isn't completely, dare I say it, rational. So the AI tools that we have, I would still describe as ultimately responsive in nature, rather than kind of proactively kind of creating new spaces for people to submit. But maybe my colleagues in AI would disagree with that, but that's my sense.
I'm quite interested in this combination of reading and publishing information. I ran a panel at Charleston a couple of years ago about the read and publish experience, and I think especially as publishers, where you have that information on what is being read and what's being published, to do that kind of, I think the two are still very, very separate. So I think that'd be quite interesting to combine that into one. So both, to someone who's reading, get a recommendation on, where others have published, what others are reading, but then also as you're choosing a journal, surfacing that information. Because, but I can imagine that's a bit of a nightmare because you have it all in different places.
That is our process. We are as siloed as, like, we literally built these two systems independently, and so connecting them is easier said than done. And I think that's the internal challenge we face, but we do feel there's a big opportunity to getting that right. And so we are looking into that quite, we're investing that quite in quite a focused fashion, I would say.
So I mean, I'll just jump in here, because before I joined Cactus, I used to consult for about 6 years with a whole bunch of startups, and their goal was on how to use data that's collected on readers, on doctors, whoever it might be, to serve advertising to them. And the difference I see between that world and the scholarly publishing world is that on the consumer space, or even on the healthcare professional space, they have a lot of information on who the person is, their persona, what they're interested in. So it makes it very easy to connect the dots and say, oh, Romy, you're a pathologist. Well, by the way, here's some stuff that you might be interested in, either something from a pharma company or something from Nature or something from ASM or somewhere. So it's very easy to connect the dots there. What I've seen with the scholarly publishing space is it's basically a black hole where all this data kind of goes in, but a lot of the publishers aren't really aware of who their readers are. down to the individual level, they might know that they come from UCSF or Harvard or Cambridge. They know from an institutional level, but they struggle when it comes to saying, okay, what's Romy interested in? What's Andrea interested in? What's Michael interested in? That sort of information doesn't exist or is not being collected yet, but it can be collected. And once we have that information, that's I think when you can get a little bit better at predicting what that person might want to read or engage with. There are ways of doing it now, but we're very limited in the sense that we can only look at the piece of content that's presented to the reader and then say, oh, this is about pathology, so I have these 5 other articles that are about pathology that this person might want to read. But it's not down to the point where, you can say Romy is interested in pathology, but this subset of pathology.
I think there are some tools like popping up, like the customer data platforms like Hum, that look at like who the user is, like if it's within your own digital properties and where they come from, and if they come from the same device, it will then pop up and say, oh, actually, you've been reading our submission guidelines. Did you know there's a read and publish agreement? So that kind of, using AI for that kind of really customized journey in a way does away with journal selector, because it's just surfaced to the author where they are in the process rather than a specific place they need to go to find the right journal. And obviously that's, kind of in a way better, but then you don't necessarily have all the metrics, and you might want to, well, what's the rejection rate for that journal and does it actually fit? So, obviously authors need to use their own brain in making that kind of assessment, right?
Yeah. I mean, as an industry, we need to get more comfortable with collecting data, and I think that's something that I think hasn't been an area of focus in the past. But even for these systems like Hum or any of these AI systems, you need a lot of that user data in order to do that, to make those predictions or to make those recommendations. And that's what's really lacking right now. But I think we will get there, but there are some challenges to doing that right now.
Legacy systems is always a challenge, isn't it?
I fully understand what you're saying, Jay, but I have to say I would not communicate this in a presentation to faculty. So the industry wants to collect more data on you. So that's something where a lot of people get nervous and get a little bit opposed and say, no, I gotta publish that myself. So I understand the need of data to understand what you are doing, how you can best serve, how you can make the better profits and play. But it's a fine line, I think, like with anything that has personal data involved, of course.
I mean, there has to be consent involved in this, and when I say we don't have the data, I mean, in a sense that we may not collect the data, but there is data that exists. So by using machine learning, you can take your corpus. So for instance, for Andrea at Springer Nature, they can take their whole corpus, 6 or 7 or 8 million articles that they have, run it through, and then they can look for links between the authors, like who's publishing with who, when are they publishing, what are they publishing it on, and then they can build those profiles. But that requires a lot of development work and a lot of processing power, and then also a lot of data analytics. So it's a lot of work to do that, but it is possible. But it's a lot of work and a lot of money that needs to be put into it in order to make that happen right now.
Yeah. And to come to the privacy issue and the kind of, people don't want to be tracked, like when Drea was talking about, well, having one place for your authors, your reviewers, your editors, so they engage with your organization because they have a certain role to play. And if you consolidate all of that in one place, of course, you're going to know who they are, and they don't mind you knowing how you interact with the content, and that maybe becomes less of an issue, don't you think?
I mean, I think so. Well, I have a dual answer to that. So I think there is a basic, our lesson from like platforms like Facebook and all, that kind of like platform capitalism is that unfortunately there's a moral hazard whereby you extract as much data as you can out of people, like, the famous joke of like, people that it's free because you're the product. And there's a very, very, very strong premium on like keeping people kind of enmeshed in your platform, and you don't want to share the data. That's your main asset as a company. So I think, you know, and I say this is my personal view, I think the academic community does need to be sort of alert to this and aware of it. Now, the flip side is, as a publisher, actually our main commodity is you know, our trusted brands, right? So we are a place which is reputable, where we don't play fast and loose. You know, we don't do predatory publishing, because if we did, it would be game over, ultimately. Even though you might say we make money, a lot of money very quickly, and then that's it. Then we don't have a long-term business plan. So trust and quality is like integral to what we do, and therefore we have a better incentive to actually make sure that we do a platform which is basically, for want of a better description, ethical and, for example, compliant with some sort of industry-wide, community-wide standard around, like, well, take sharing of reviewer reports, right? Like, in an ideal world, and all publishers, as far as I know, at least at an editorial level, to be honest, I know editors that have ignored the high-level directives of like their publishers. When I was in Nature Physics, we always shared referee reports with like the APS if we were asked. It was a faff, it was manual, and it happened very rarely, so we could do it. But if you want to do this at scale and guide it away, one of the reasons we did that is because we would facilitate this. You need some sort of industry-wide agreed upon protocol to do this. And that's what's lacking. And that's where there is a collective action problem, because normally what happens is you get some sort of, you know, take ORCID, that's an industry-wide sort of like, should we say, publisher agnostic approach. Yeah. The extent to which you get take up is patchy. Things evolve technologically speaking, so maybe it gets viewed as being a little bit, you know, behind the curve or a little bit too far ahead of the curve. You get these sort of problems, but I do feel that this is a fine line we need to navigate, and if we know what's good for us, we will make platforms that allow people to share their data in a forget the word, transposable way. Like there's a term that people use. Like we would absolutely support that, and the conversations I'm aware of internally all sort of like, you know, at least pay lip service to this. So it's something that we're very well aware of.
Yeah. Now, Andrea, you've touched a little bit on the kind of what's best for the author versus what's best for the manuscript, and Michael, you've talked about that as well. What's realistic for the author, looking at, you know, acceptance rates. Do you think that is ever something that can be included in a kind of recommender tool, like ingesting a manuscript and being able to predict, well, actually, based on AI matching, whatever, you know, your potential acceptance rate is this much?
I mean, I want to say, so I'm pretty certain that with the right level of modeling and like in data, like that, that's possible. I would feel uncomfortable. Like, I think the best thing we can do is just give a kind of a dispassionate look. This is the acceptance rate, and this is the turnaround time. You need to make the decision as an author. Like, I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and all too often, I find that some like science relies on like serendipitous discovery that like is outside of like the narrative, the pattern, what people expect, and no self-respecting editor, in my view, would shut themselves off from that or want to shut themselves off from that. So if I was still editor of Nature Physics, I'd be very nervous about having something telling authors, don't submit here because your chances of getting published for this paper are low. Like, well, let me decide that. Like, I'm the editor and maybe I'll like it. So I think we kind of want it both ways on this. But I do think technically what you're saying is entirely achievable, like with the current technology.
I'm just thinking an author reading, 35% acceptance rate, I'm just making this up, I have no idea, would be like, well, that's not too bad, but that's not for my manuscript, and my manuscript could still be shit. Whereas if I then upload it somewhere and it tells me 5% chance, I will probably take that a bit more seriously than just a general, you know. I wonder how serious authors take that acceptance rate, and they think, oh, actually my manuscript is better. Surely I'm not one of those, you know.
I think people take it as they want to take it, if you know what I mean. It's like 5%. Well, I'll be one of 5%, which is great. Like, people kind of so, and it, you know, and it's very important to understand that like I'm actually quite allergic to the whole argument. you know, I am a statistical physicist, so I actually like to think I understand statistics reasonably well, at least the dynamics of statistics. And it's like, just because something has a high or a low chance of happening on average, there's, you know, well, you're an individual, you know, your trajectory may have nothing to do with that average. And as a, you know, as a publisher, it's like, no, we need to be able to serve you, like Romy, as an individual. And that isn't necessarily 5, 15, or 30 or 35%. It really depends on your paper and what you've got in there. But I think there is a determinism that's creeping into the, you know, what AI can do, which I feel, be careful what you wish for kind of thing. But I guess that's a much wider nervousness people have around AI.
My
and the 35%, as Andrea said, it's just the average, and there's so many factors getting into the turnaround time and the rejection rates, for example, like how fast is the peer reviewer or the peer reviewers working? How fast are you yourself as an author making revisions? And some other factors that determine these rates, that the 35%, if we take this, it's just like a number, and I don't think I'm very comfortable with projecting this and saying, and then having it like a lottery or something like this. Okay, if you have a better chance or not.
Let's talk a little bit about open access and how important that is to author when they select journals. Who wants to go first?
Well, let me start. Because we have this reader-publish agreement or publish-and-read agreement with Springer, among others. And authors, I can speak only for our authors, are more and more, see this more and more as mainstream. I have lots of questions from authors who want to publish open access, and sometimes I have to say, well, sorry, we don't have any support because we don't have any agreement and stuff. So it is sort of, lots of people expect that they almost think they have to do it. I mean, they don't, but it's like there was a tipping point at some point where before that, like 20 years ago, there was just a few activists who were running for open access. And now it's a tipping point where everybody has to jump on a bandwagon, or if it's a feeling we have to jump on a bandwagon, and we have to do this, and they're looking for ways to get support and so on, which is all good, I think. The funder requirements are doing their part. Of course, you all know about the OSTP memo, to make it all federal funded research publicly available. That's not a mandate for publishing open access, but lots of people understand it as that, lots of authors. So I think that's the way to go at the moment. Many journals flip to open access. That's also something that I saw in the last few years. And then there are new publishers, full open access publishers, who are quite successful, from PLOS to Frontiers and so on. This is something that I need to probably qualify a little bit what I said earlier, ask your peers and your senior researchers. This is also sort of a moving target because the landscape is changing. So what the journal that your professor 20 years ago had published in all the time might not be the best place anymore. So this is also changing. But again, so the open access train is rolling, I think, and there's no.
But do some authors specifically look for those journals, and others like look for the right journal, and then the open access element might come in later? So I guess it depends on, you know, the person, the organization, and what's being pushed as well.
I mean, what we find quite clearly from our user data, or like, you know, because we survey our authors quite extensively when we can, is that it's gradually been rising up the list of considerations. But like first and foremost, like, you know, it's basically it's journal reputation, stroke impact factor. Like mandates have been coming in over the past years, and so therefore that has brought open access up. Some people believe in it like passionately because of like, you know, it's I would say kind of a, I would call it a political position, if you will, on the importance of open access. But an awful lot of authors don't actually seem to care so much about it. Or some feel, well, I posted on a preprint server, doesn't that count? And then like the journal's another thing. So that's a very common mindset in physics. In physics, it's like, well, you put it on archive and then you can publish it wherever you want. Probably, you know, there's only really three main venues that people consider. It's like nature and its ecosystem, science and its ecosystem, and the APS and its ecosystem. And the thing that we find is the most, let's say, complex conversation around open access is actually, you know, in order to address a disparity for like access to reading our content, which is basically, oh, the rich institutions can access like, you know, all of our papers, but like, you know, those without a subscription license cannot. We've kind of flipped the thing, and that now we've kind of made, there's a barrier for publication that everyone can read it. And I think that therefore we find that there are challenges to making open access equitable, like in, you know, say India. That's an area where most of our authors simply cannot afford our APCs, and we have to kind of you know, come up with creative solutions to that. But yeah, the general direction of travel is that open access is kind of, you know, it's now part of the fabric of science, and it's only, you know, gaining ever more momentum.
Yeah, it's not going away, is it? I realize we're running a little bit out of time. We haven't talked about predatory publishing yet, but there's also a couple of questions there that I wanted to make sure we could get to. There's one from Samir: what are the exact mechanics of the journal selectors? Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly. So some of these journal selectors will allow you to copy and paste your abstract, and then it will use keywords from that abstract in order to match it to specific journals. So, and you know, others are very much based on things like journal title or subject areas or keyword searches. So, you know, they can be very, very simple as just saying, okay, you're looking for a pathology journal. Well, here you go. Here's a list of 100 pathology journals. Or, you know, you can use things like, you know, machine learning, where you can say, hey, here's my 250 word abstract, you know, find me the best journal possible. And then what it'll do is it'll try to look for, you know, look for the journal that closest matches specific keywords in your abstract. The key here is that no two of these tools will return the same answer, depending on what the mechanism on the back end is. And I just kind of did this really quickly on an abstract for a pathology article on bioRxiv, and our tool returned a different set of 25 journals versus Jane, which returned another set of 25 journals, versus LetPub, where I did a search for pathology and it returned, you know, like 200 journals in pathology. So no two tools are going to work the same.
Yeah. And maybe that's a way to sway into the predatory publishing. We haven't really touched on like kind of predefined lists. I know we've talked about think, check, submit, and using your brain to make a decision. But there's a lot of wait lists, blacklists out there. There's the Chinese list, then you have, you know, Web of Science. Do any of these journal recommenders do they include all journals that are out there, potentially predatory journals, or do they work with a defined curated list?
So the caveat is, yes, they might include predatory journals. So if you go on Jane's website, they listed right there that, hey, because we are sourcing content from PubMed,
right,
predatory journal content might be indexed in PubMed, so we might pull that. So I think at the end of the day, you know, these journal selectors, again, are an aid to helping you select the right journal, but you still have to kind of go through that think, check, submit process to make sure you're making the right decision. I know I can tell you from our end, we try and remove predatory journals. So if we know they're predatory, we don't index them or we don't provide a profile on them, but that doesn't mean that we have 100% removed every predatory journal. They could be in there. So it's always important to do that think, check, submit, even after you selected, a couple of journals from these selectors.
Thanks. There's another question. What are your thoughts on those EICs, editorial teams, who focus on having a low acceptance rate and the impact that has on author retention? Andrea, one for you, I think.
Sorry, on those that have a low acceptance rate.
Low acceptance rate have an impact on author retention.
So well, I mean, that's what nature does, right? And I think that, so from our perspective, it's like, if you have an ecosystem of for transfers, and I know you did a previous webinar on this, and I guess that's where it was discussed, a journal, like a sufficiently well-regarded journal, like can afford to have a low impact factor, sorry, a low acceptance rate, provided it has a destination journal it can like recommend rejections towards, and provided that connection is close enough so that the author doesn't get a terrible experience, right? So the way to solve that issue is to basically have a portfolio of many journals that are connected. Having said that, the clue's in the name, publishing industry. So we like to kind of see journals publishing more. And I think if there's one thing that open access has done is change the orthodoxy away from like, a bias to reject towards a bias to publish. That does mean it's opened up a bit of a can of worms with, predatory publishers. But I think that that's where the quality and long-term reputation kind of like self-correcting mechanism also is important. So yeah, in general, if there's an edit, even for external journals where people are really, really strict about what they like to maybe publish only their certain school of thought, I think it was a comment that I think Michael made, like that's a bit, I would say, old-fashioned, a bit like that's not the way I would say any publisher would really like to see their journals being run anymore, because it doesn't really ultimately serve the community in the way that like really benefits anyone, apart from maybe that editor.
Yeah. Now, we've got a couple of minutes left. I think we touched on most things that we're going to talk about. So we're going to do just a quick round from everyone. If there's anything else you want to add, or to close off kind of your perspective, is anything you've learned today that you find quite interesting? Jay, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is my time, as well as I think a lot of people's time in our industry and academia, has been consumed by the talk of, AI and research integrity and helping authors select the right journals. And all of this AI stuff is very useful, but again, they're tools. So we do have to rely on everything that we've learned as people and as experts to make the right decisions. So we can't give that decision making up to these AI tools. We have to still be responsible for it. We can use them as aids, but it's, at the end of the day, it's our decision and our responsibility. That's all I would like to leave people with here.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Thank you. What about you, Michael?
Well, just saying thank you again for having me here, and thanks for everyone to join. I learned quite a bit actually from my fellow panelists here, and I think it's important that we keep this discussion going and connect people from different areas of the research support spectrum, so to speak. So publishers, infrastructure providers, services, and libraries and funders, maybe, and authors, maybe. So we should.
Yeah, I struggle finding author speakers, to be honest. But we've had a couple of researchers on panels. Like we've very good.
Yeah, and that might be a little bit tricky too, because everyone is looking at him or herself perspective. You get whatever physicist in or a humanist, then they're completely different perspectives. So it's shaped then the public the discussion.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Andrea, anything you want to say in closing?
No, well, thank you as well from myself, and I really want to echo both what Jay and Michael, I guess it's Michael, so presuming you're German originally, said. And I would actually echo particularly, I think science is intrinsically a human, in my view, creative act, and I think that it's very important for like, yes, AI is a tool, can augment things, I'm of the view that AI is a little bit overhyped, particularly when it comes to like the cutting edge. Like if you have lots of data, then great, it can draw patterns for you. But when you're really at the cutting edge, you're discovering something new, there is no new data, you're making that data. That's where I think the scientist as a creative sort of human really comes into play. And therefore, I think there will always be a people element to this publishing game that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And thanks everyone for joining us today. If you want to be kept up to date with news at Chronosoft, and we also got a specific events mailing list, then please join that. I don't have any webinar schedules right now. Maybe after the summer, I think I need to take a little break. But I'll be at SSP in Boston next week. So if you're there, come and say hi. And then one of my colleagues is at BiblioCon as well, later in June. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions for the panelists after that we haven't answered, please feel free to drop me an email and I'll forward it on. Thanks so much.
Right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.